Okay, so today is Lag BaOmer. It's the day that most people attribute to being the yahrzeit of Shimon ben Yochai, although that's also questionable. Today is also the yahrzeit of the Ramah. The Ramah, whose psakim we follow across the board, is his yahrzeit today. So the Shomas Shav Levi, that should be Mil Yosher for us all. So yesterday we learned that the second stage of training for the Kohen Gadol was after he was at the Ziknei Bezdin, then he went to the Ziknei Kahuna, and they taught him about the specifics of the Keteris, we'll see. It was Besatinis, and they made him swear that he would do the process properly. So we're up to the Gemara on the top of Yud Testament base, of Testament Aleph, the very first Gemara. Tana, we learned, why did he have to go to the Beis Haftinas, to the Aliyah's Beis Haftinas? Amar Papa, Lalamde Chafina, teach him Chafina. So Rashi, Malichanoi Shel Beis Haftinas, Shesham Haktaris Motzi. That's what a Ktaris is. Chafina is the way he scooped up the Ktaris to put into the Machta. It was a very big chachma how to do it. Where can you find spare Ktaris? At the place where it's manufactured. That's why it's logical that he studied it over there. Omar Papa, Shtei Lishkos Hayuloi, the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol had actually two separate chambers that he spent time in preparing for Yom Kippur. There was Achas, was the Lishkas Parhedrin. The Achas was the Lishkas Beis Haftinas. So we know the Lishkas Parhedrin is where he spent all day, where he slept. And the Beis Haftinas is where he went during the day for training. Lishkas Haftinas, Lilmot Chafina, to learn how to make Chafina. Zog to Gemara, where were these Lishkas located? Achas B'tzafin, one of these Lishkas was on the north side of the Azara. So if we're looking at our typical picture of the Beis HaMikdash, where the Heichal is to the left and the Ezras Noshim and the entrance is to the right, so to the right is east and to the left is west, then the north side, which would be the top of our picture, is where the Lishkas, is where one of the Lishkas were. One was B'tzafin, Ba'achas B'darim, and the other one was on the south side. So to Gemara, Achas B'tzafin, one was on the Tzafin side, that's non we learned, Vav Lishkos Hayu Ba'azar. There were four Lishkos in the Azara. There were four different chambers. There were six. I touched this four. There were six chambers in the Azara. Gimel B'tzafin. Three of them were on the north side of the Azara. The Gimel B'darim. And three of them were on the south side of the Azara. Sheb'darim was the Lishkas HaMelech. On the south side, there was one Lishka that was called the Lishkas HaMelech, the Lishka of salt. The Gemara is going to explain what these were for. There was the Lishkas HaParva, and the Lishkas Hamadichin, the rinsing Lishka. Lishkas HaMelech. What do they do in the Lishkas HaMelech? Zok to Gemara. Shesham hayumoichin oiris kachim. That's where they would salt the hides that belong to the kachim. The algaga. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. I apologize. Lishkas HaMelech shesham hayu noisnin melach lekarba. That's where they would store the salt that was used to salt the karbanis, and there are those who learn that's where they actually salted the meat. Lishkas HaParva was shesham hayu melchim oiris kachim. That's where they salted the oiris kachim, and it's brought down. Where were the oiris kachim? That's if the Kohanim, who were entitled to the oiris of the behemoths, if they left those oiris back to Bedek Habayis. The algaga, and on the top of the Lishkas HaParva, haya based tefillah l'kohen gadol b'yom Kippur. On the roof, there was a mikveh. There's a mikveh up on the roof. Algagas of Rashi, haya based tefillah. How do you have a mikveh on the roof? They were able to get Mima'ayin up to the second floor. They got it up to the second floor. And they had a mikveh on top of the space of Parva, And since these are the tefillas that the Kohen Gadol did on Yom Kippur, this Beis HaParva must have been within the confines of the Zorah. It was B'Kodesh. Okay. Lishkas HaMadichin, this Lishka where they rinse things, Sham Hoya Madichin Kirvei Kachim. That's where they would clean out the intestines of the Kachim. And even though Tosfos mentions that there were shulchanos, there were tables in the Azora where they would rent the kachim. Yesh loymar, the basar kachim madichem ala shulchanos, the meat of the kachim, they would rinse off on the tables. Aval kirve kachim, but the intestines, which smelled really bad, sheish ban perish umeisi madichem oisay bilishkus hamadichem. So in other words, the washing, it depends. If it didn't need depends, if it was just a regular meat, then it was washed on the tables. But if it was depends type of cleaning, it means it was intestinal dirt, that they did special in the Lishkas Hamadichin. Umishom, and from the Lishkas Hamadichin, there was a Mesiba Oila Lagag Beis HaParva. There was a circular stairs that went up in the Lishkas Hamadichin that took you to the roof of the Beis HaParva. So Rashi Mesiba was binyan avana. It was a stone circular staircase, megalgalos, circular, v'seivois, b'makif amud. So basically, the way a circular staircase is normally built is with a center post and then pie-shaped stairs that rotate around the post. L'gag Beis HaParva, lalis la der chamesiba. So that's how the Kohen Gadol got up the table there. He went up through the circular staircase. Gimel Shabbat Safin. There were also 3 lishkas on the north side of the Azor. There was the Lishkas HaEitz, there was the Lishkas HaGoyla, and the Lishkas HaEitz is where they kept wood. Lishkas HaGoyla, Rashi says, Al Shem Bar Shekaru Shem Oile Goyla. There was a bar that the Oile Goyla paid to dig there. That's why it was called the Lishkas HaGoyla, and they had a water supply there. And it's brought down that didn't they have an Amas HaMayim going through the Azor? So it's brought down that the Amas HaMayim that was going through the Azor, where they used a lot of water from, was not clean for drinking. It was not drinking water. This bar that they built special provided the drinking water and clean water, fresh water, for the entire island. Lishkas HaGozis. And then there was the Lishkas HaGozis, which we'll see soon, housed this Sanhedrin. There's a very beautiful chamber that was built. Lishkas HaEitz. So what was this Lishkas HaEitz? Omer Belezer ben Yaakov, Shechachti ma hoysem mishemesh. So I actually forgot what went on in there. Once again, we had earlier in the Mishnayos, Belezer ben Yaakov said that he wasn't sure what was done in one of the lishkas in the Ezras Noshim, and that's how we proved that the Mishnah in Midos was going according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Abba Shaul says, Lishkas Kohen Gadol, Hoysa Achoyre Shtein. The Lishka of the Kohen Gadol that we're talking about was behind the earlier 2 mentioned, the Lishkas HaGozis and Lishkas HaEitz. Behind it was the Lishkas Kohen Gadol. And the Gag Shloston Shava, and it had one big roof that was like one flat roof that was covering both the Lishkas HaGoyla and the Lishkas HaEitz, the Lishkas HaGozis, and the Lishka of the Kohen had one big roof. Zokt Rashi, Achoyre Shtein, the Lishkas HaGoyla, Lishkas HaGozis, the Gag Shloshton Shava, Kiri Echad L'Shloshton, had one big roof, so it was a big patio. Lishkas HaGoyla, what was there? Sham Haya Bar HaGoyla. That's where the bar of the Goyla was. Now, why was it called Goyla? So Rashi told us earlier that it was called Goyla because the people from the Bnei HaGoyla were the ones who dug it. So usually, and there's another pshat brought down in the Rishonim, that the Lishkas HaGoyla means it's a place where there was the pulley wheel. Galgal Nosanov, there's a pulley wheel over it because that pulley was used to raise the bucket that was lower down into the cistern so that they can get water out. So there are those who learned that it was called Lishkas Goyla, not because of Rashi's reason, Chakaru Shom Oila Goyla. Rather, it was called the Goyla because it had this wheel in it. And the reason why they don't like learning that it was named after the people who paid for the people from the Goyla is because everything in Israel is paid for by the Goyla. And we know that. They rely on us for everything. So why would they B'dafka name Dafka this well? Everything in the entire Beis Hamikdash should be called Goyla, because as you've seen today, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, everything is paid for by Yidden that are in the diaspora. So therefore, those Rishonim learned that it was called the Goyla because of this wheel. Lishkas Hagazis. What was the Lishkas Hagazis? So the Gemara, Sham Haya Sanhedrin Shel Yisrael Yosheves V'Dones HaKayanim. That's where the main Sanhedrin was, and one of the jobs of the Sanhedrin was to clear each Kohen that was coming to do the avodah. They were screened and cleared by the Dayanim in the Lishkas Hagazis. If, as each person submitted his credentials and was analyzed by the Bezdin, if they found in him a psul, he would put on black clothing, and he would wrap himself up in an outer garment of black, and he would slip out in a very discreet fashion. And if the Kohen was zoicha, that he was roy to do the avodah, he would put on the white big kahuna, he would be zoicha to go do the avodah. Achas b'dor. Let's talk about this chamber on the south side. Bitnan, we learned. Shiva sha'arim hoyu basar. There are 7 gates to get into the Azar. Many of the gates were actually gates that went through a lishka. Like, for instance, we looked at the lishka's Beis HaMoiked. There was an entrance to the lishka's Beis HaMoiked from Harabayis to the north and from the Azar to the south. Like we learned, depending on where you came from, that's why the lishka's Atloim was considered to be on the north side. So that was one of the entrances. So a lot of the entrances were in lishkas. But let's see what these entrances are. There were 7 gates into the Azar. Gimel b'tzafim. There were 3 on the north side of the Azar, the Gimel b'Dorim, and there were 3 on the south side of the Azar. The Echad b'Mizrach, and one was Mizrach, which was the front entrance, the Shar Nikner that took you into the Azar. Sheb'Dorim, what were the names of the gateways into the Beis HaMikdash on the south side of the Azar? There was the Shar Hadlaka. There was one was called the Shar Hadlaka. And then there was Sheni Loi Shar Korban was called Shar Korban. Rashi says, Lo Yadati Loma Nikra Shmamkach. I don't know where these 2 doorways got their names from. Shlishi Loi, the 3rd gateway, was called the Shar Hamayim. That Rashi already tells us the reason why. Shaboy Machnisen Sloichia Shalmayim Shal Nisuch Bechag. Kach Mefarish B'Shkolim. We looked at Masech Shkolim. This Shar Hamayim, which was on the south side, I believe it was the southeast side, that's where they brought the water in to do the Simchas Beis HaShev. I'm sorry, to do the Nisuch Hamayim. Sheba Mizrach was Shar Nikner. We know the main front entrance of the Beis HaMikdash was Shar Nikner, and there's actually a shaila where that name comes from. There's the pshat that we're most familiar with, that it was donated by a Yid named Niknar, and there was a nace that occurred because when they were on the ship being brought from wherever they were brought from, there was a terrible storm, and they threw one of the doors overboard to try to level the ship, and they wanted to throw a second one, and the owner said, over my dead body, I will not let you do that, and so they couldn't. And when they arrived to Eretz Yisrael and they were unloading, the second door that was thrown out was actually underneath the ship that got caught there, and he pulled it out. But there was actually another reason why they named it Shar Nikner, because during the times of the Avonim, the Nikner did terrible things to Mechal, the Kedusha, the Hechal, and they ended up winning over him, and they ended up killing him, and they hung him there. They killed him over there, so they named the Shar Niknar after him. That's another pshat brought down the Gemara. Ushtei lishkos hoyusham. there were two lishkos, there were two little chambers to the right and to the left of the main front entrance of the base of the Azara. Which would mean one to the north and one to the south. Because if you're headed west, coming through Shar Niknar, to your right will be north, and to your left will be south. So the Gemara says, Achas Lishkas Pinchas Hamalabesh. Pinchas, who was the wardrobe expert, he was the one who helped the Kohanim get dressed. He had a special lishka on one side of Shar Niknar, the Achas Lishkas Oiseh Chavit. And the other one was a lishka, was a chamber where they prepared the minchas chavitim that the Kohanim brought when they did avodah, and the Kohen Gadol brought every day. Shabbat Sofan. Now let's look at the three gates to the Azara that were on the north side. There was the Shar Nitzotz, the Shar of the Spark. Let me just quickly see what the Bach says in Beis. If I can find it over here. Shar Nitzotz uchemin achsadra haya. It was more like an open patio. So imagine if you have posts that are holding up a roof. So underneath it would be like a patio. On top of the post, there was another flat roof, which acted as a second story vantage point, lookout point. The Shom Kohanim Shomer Milamayla. Kohanim would be on the upper level, acting as guards, as honor guards for the Azara. Uleviim Milamata. Then there was a set of guards that were Leviim, that were on the lower level. So if it rained, the Leviim were dry, and the Kohanim got wet. And let's see what it says on the Gimel. Leviim Milamata. Upesach Hayaloi, and it had a doorway. Minachel. It had a doorway from the Chel, meaning you were able to, it was one of the doorways that you're able to get into it from the north through the from the Chel. Okay. Zok to Gemara weiter. Sheni loy. The second one was the Shar HaKarban, which Rashi told us earlier. He doesn't know why it was called that. And Shlishi loy was the Shar Beis HaMoiked. The Shar Beis HaMoiked was the big chamber that was called the Beis HaMoiked, that we learned that had four chambers inside it. It had Lishkas HaTloyim in it, Lishkas Lachem Aponim in it, that we discussed earlier with the Machlokes, which there's a shayla of the Machlokes between Talmud and Midos, or if they both agree with each other. So there was an entrance to get in to the Beis HaMoiked from the north, from the Chel. There was also an entrance from the south to get in there from the Azara. And if you remember, we learned that they had bollards going through it to indicate which part of it was Kodesh and which part of it was only part of the Harbais. But Tanya, we learned Chomesh Tfilos Vasar Kedushin Toivel Kohen Gadol Mekadosh Boivi. The Kohen Gadol toiveled 5 times, and he did 10 times Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim on the day of Yom Kippur. V'chulon b'kodesh, and all of these tefillos were in a mikveh that was within the confines of the Azara. And where was that? As we listed earlier, Al Gag Beis HaParva. The mikveh was on the roof of the Beis HaParva, which was considered internal to the Azara. Chutz mizu, except for the very first tefillah, when he came in the morning, shoysu b'chol, because Rashi says chutz mizu tefillah rishayna she'eina ba b'shvil Yom HaKippurim. That's not part of the Yom HaKippurim avodah. She'af kol yimos hashana sheninu b'per gimel. Every single day before someone's allowed to enter the Azara, in Adam Nichlas Lazara afilu tahar ad sheyitbal. Even if someone is tahar, he still must toivel before he enters the Azara. Avol tefillas haboismach b'Yom HaKippurim, but the tefillas that were for Yom Kippur, when he was changing from the B'dei Lavan to the B'dei Zav and vice versa, ve'inan makom kadosh. That mikveh had to be within the Azara, because it says in the pasuk, "Dachik sivu rachat espesari b'mayim b'makom kadosh." But the mikveh in the morning, he wasn't allowed, could not have been in the Azara, because he wasn't allowed to enter the Azara. No kohen, no Yisrael, no person may enter the Azara until they first toivel, of course, outside the confines of the Azara. Chutz mizu shoysa b'choil, and where was it? It was al gabe shar hamayim. So there was another mikveh that was on top of the shar hamayim, and that mikveh was not within the walls of the Azara, and that's where the kohen toiveled first thing in the morning. Uvitzad l'shkosei haisa. And where was this early morning mikveh? It was located right before his lishka. So Rashi, Alma lishka yesh leibadar. We stated earlier that there was a lishka on the tzafin and lishka on the darim. Well, we know there was a mikveh that he went to, and we know this mikveh was on the Shar Mayim, which we also know is bedarim. So by definition, that tells us that one of the lishkas that the Kohen Gadol was in the week preparing for Yom Kippur must have also been on the darim. Zok Gemara, v'lo yadana, I'm not sure. Ilishkas parhedrin b'tzafin was the lishkas parhedrin where he spent his nights. Is that the lishka that we're talking about that was on the north side of the Azara? The lishkas beis haftinis b'darim, and the lishkas beis haftinis where he just went for his Keteris instruction. That was on the south side, or maybe it was the opposite. Or lishkas beis haftinis b'tzafan, and maybe the lishkas parhedrin was b'darim. So we don't know which was where. We just know one was darim, one was tzafan. We don't know which was which. Yes.
I'm a bit confused. Didn't we learn 2 blot ago there were 4 lishkas, and how do we get to 6?
No, there were 4 lishkas inside the lishkas beis hamoikid. So one of these 6 lishkas here was a very big one, and it had 4 chambers inside it.
So these were the chambers within the chamber. And then, okay,
but today we're not discussing that. Today we're discussing the main big chambers in the Hazara. 2 days ago, we were focused on one of these 6 chambers discussed today, which is the Lishkas Beis HaMoiked, and that Lishkas Beis HaMoiked happened to have had 4
divided
chambers
into 4. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's see what the Gemara says later. The Lishkas Beis Haftinis B'Dorim or Lishkas Beis Haftinis B'Tzafin, Lishkas Pedin B'Dorim. We don't know. Zokter Mustaver, logic would dictate, and this is a beautiful shtickle, logic would dictate that the Lishkas Perhedin was B'Dorim Hafad, that the Lishkas Perhedin where the Kohen slept was on the south side. Rashi says, Mustav Lishkas Perhedin Shahu Yoshin Sham, that's where the Kohen slept, would be B'Dorim Havya, Eitzel Beis HaTfilas Choil. The Shar Mayim, which had the mikveh that was exterior to the Azara, that was on the south side. It's logical to say that the Kohen's sleeping and living quarters were also on the south side, near the mikveh that was out of the Azara. My time, what's the reason for that? It's pretty obvious. Makdim, he would wake up in the morning. Makdim Kohen. What does he do? What does he do first thing when you wake up in the morning? What does every person our age do between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m.? They think, should I get out of bed? Shouldn't I? Can I hold it? Can I not hold it? And so the Kohen, as soon as he woke up, what did he do? He goes to the washroom, and then v'tovel, and then he tovels. So it's very convenient because if his chamber is in the south, he's very close to the mikveh that was bechoyel, that was in the south, that he must tovel in before he's even allowed to enter the Azar. Now that he toveled, he'll cross the Azar.
Where did he Taka go to the washroom? I don't remember any washrooms here.
I guess there must have been access to a washroom there somewhere.
So there
were underground chambers where there were washrooms that we learned in Midas. So there was probably access to a washroom somewhere.
So covering his feet means going to the bathroom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's what you do. When you pull your pants down, you cover your feet.
I hear. Listen, I just drove on the thruway, and let me tell you, it's important that people cover their feet. Okay, so the Haled Gemara Viter, v'tovil v'ozalosofin. So once he tovels external to the Azar, he may now enter the Azar, and he could walk right across the Azar because he's allowed now to enter the Azar. The Gomer Chafina, and he'll go to his classes of the day that would be in the Lishkas Beis Haftinas, where he was able to learn about the Keteris. And then then he did all his avoid in the Beis Hamikdash, because we're talking about the 7 days where he was preparing for the Yom Kippur. So he did the avoid those days. And L'Bahad Panya, in the afternoon, after he did avodah, like we discussed in the second territory of the Gemara earlier, Madu Alel, every day they spritzed on him from the Par Aduma. So only after he did the avodah for the day did they spritz on him, because then he becomes tamei. We said because on the side that he's tahar, we learned that someone who's tahar who gets spritzed upon becomes tamei. So they would spritz on him after he finished all the avodah. V'hader azol v'tavel. Then he would go back to the same mikveh, the mikveh that was outside of the Azara, and he would toivel because he has to toivel from the tumah that he got because they spritzed on him even though he was tar, and then v'nayich, and then he settles in for the evening. Zok Rashi, my time in Maktim Koi, Kishu Maskim, Leboiker, Kol Shiva, Ayimid Bebitasi. Every morning he would get up during those 7 days, he would get up, and Mesech Raglo V'toivel. Hasam, he would toivel right there, off the south side, right near his hotel room, Al Gav Shar Hamayim, on top of the Shar Hamayim, Shehi Al Gaba, it's above on the thickness of the wall. So within the wall itself, they dug out Masukin based Tfilas Choil. On that wall of the Shar Hamayim, they actually dug out a bar that they had a mikveh. They were able to divert water there from Ainita, Kidlakama, which was a source of water. The law is if one makes ketanim, ton tefillah, he's then mechuyev not only to wash his hands like we do, but also to toivel likanish be'azar in order to be able to enter the azar. V'azul etzafan, and then after he's royu to do the avodah because he toiveled, then he goes l'tzafan l'leshkosei ashniya. He goes to his second chamber that was the aliyah beis haftinas, lil moit chafina to learn the malacha the ketaris. The Asi lebeis hamikdash, then he goes down into the beis hamikdash. V'avid avoda kula yomi, does avoda the whole day. Kedetnan kol shiva siyam muzar kesadam. V'adapanya madola kedamin b'reish prikin, like we learned earlier. And then once again, v'azul adar v'toval al sharamayim. He once again toivels. Rabbi Kiva the Amar tar shenafal of azar temasai. Because Rabbi Kiva holds that he becomes tamei because he got spritzed. And then v'nayich hoilich v'shoichev b'lishkas parhedrin asher etzel beis hatfil. And then he can go back. So it's logical to say that this would be his schedule and his route. Okay, there used to be a comic strip that would show the route of a child going places, and they would be like a dotted line with an arrow showing all the different places where he went to. So that's what we have to imagine over here to trace the steps of the Kohen Gadol. He started off in his hotel room in the south. He went to the mikveh in the morning. He crossed Azara to the north side. He spent some time in the Lishkas Beis Haftinas to learn about Ketores. Then he went south into the Azara to do all the Avodah. Then he got spritzed. Then he was toiveled again, and then he went back to his hotel room on the south. However, Zok Gemara, if you're going to say, the Amit Lishkas Perhedim B'Tzofin, if you're going to say that his hotel room was on the north side of the Azara, it's a very unusual and out of order and inefficient route, because you're going to say Maktim Koi. He's going to get up in the morning. Remember, he's on the north side. He's north of the Azara. Umesach Ragel will relieve himself, but then he has to toivel. He cannot toivel in the mikveh that's on the north. He has to go back down around to the mikveh that's on the south wall. The problem is he cannot walk through the Azara to get there because he's not allowed into the Azara till he toivels. So he has to walk all the way around the Beis Hamikdash, and then the Ozelador. The toivels, then the Gomer Chafina, because in this option, the Lishka of the Chafina was on the south side. Then he'll go back into the Beis Hamikdash to do Avodah. Avodah Kuliyah, he'll do Avodah the whole day. Ladapani in the afternoon, once again, Madu Allah, they spritz on him. Then he's going to have to go to the Durham side, which is where the mikveh was, on the Sharamayim, V'tovel. And then he has to leave the Azara, and he has to walk all the way around again. He's not allowed to walk through the Azara. He has to walk all the way around to the north side to get back to his room. And that's quite a tircha. Would you make him make such a tircha? Because of that, it's logical to say that his dwelling place, his hotel room, was on the south, which was near the Shar HaMayim, which was near his mikveh. And the Beis Haftinas was on the north side, where he went to learn the Ma'aseh Ketores. That would be a much more efficient routing for it. Dr. Rashi, the Amit Lishkos Parhedrin, Shehu Yoshinba, where he slept, have a Betzafim was on the north side, Urechoikim Beis Hatfilah, and it's very far from the Beis Hatfilah because he has to walk all the way around the Azara in order to get to the south side, to the Beis Hatfilah. Hiterachtoi Kol HaAmal Hazeh. Your mom is making him work very hard. Then Voslador L'Sharmayim is to walk all the way around to the south. Then V'Tovel V'Gomer Chavina Hasam B'Vesaftinas Hashasham Vosel B'Samikdash. Why is it such a big deal? Why do you think it's such a bad thing that we should trouble him? It's good that we should be matriach him, and he should have to run around a lot. You know why? Because then only someone who's truly l'shem shamayim would be willing to go through this. But anyone who's not truly l'shem shamayim will say, you know what? I don't need this. The tzeduku lifresh. If he's a tzeduk, he'll stop. It's good to be matriachim. Let's purposely make it very difficult for him. The tzeduki, if he's taka tzeduk, he's not erlich. Then the yorish shemayim lekabel olav torach hamikdash lifrosh minakuna gedoyla. If he doesn't want this hard work, he'll say, you know what? I don't need the kuna gedoyla. I'd rather not. But lo yikablanu mitchila, and he won't accept it. V'toylanu, that's the best thing for us. Because sharehein avoida could come on mishmach, and they mess up the avoida. So let's put obstacles, and only a kohen who's really erlich would be interested in doing the avoida. Inami, even the kohen gadol himself, who is erlich, let him get some exercise. Shaloi tezuch taitelov. It's good for him. He shouldn't get too high and mighty. We learned yesterday that we put the behemoths in front of him to bring him down. He shouldn't think he's up there. He shouldn't think he's something special. So to let him run around, let him be matriach, to show that he shouldn't be a balgaiva. So to Rashi, if you let him kosher, even if you let him kosher, it's a good idea to make him work hard. His goys, he shouldn't be a balgaiva. Because if you don't say that, if you don't agree with me that even a good kohen, we should give him a run for his money, well, then you could have made it simpler. Now, why do they have one lishka in the north and one lishka in the south? They should have both been together, so he shouldn't have to run around at all. Or they should have done all of the thing in one lishka to make it easy for him. Elamai, you see, we want him to work a little bit. So it's not fair to say that he'd have to run from the north to the south because we want the Kohanim to work a little bit. They shouldn't become balakayim. Then they could have made everything together, and then he doesn't have to move around at all. He has a one-stop shop. The Torah says we want to be matriach. So Reb Meir Shapiro said over a beautiful, beautiful part over here. We know that it says yadrin. If somebody wants to be a chacham, he should go l'dorim. Why? Because the menorah was on the south side of the heichal, and the menorah represents Ner HaTorah. And it says if someone wants to become wealthy, Yatzpin, he should go to the north. Why? Because on the north side of the Heichal was the Shulchan, which represents Parnasa. So Dr. Meir Shapiro, the Kohen Gadol, has to know that he has an achrayus to be poyalois for Klal Yisrael, every type of Yeshua, the Yeshua of the Tzofin and the Yeshua of the Dorim. He has to be poyalois, Ruchnius and Gashmius for Klal Yisrael. So yes, he's got to run to the north and run to the south. He's got to run back and forth because he has to make sure to cover all the bases. He has to run all four bases in order to poyalois for Klal Yisrael. And there was a letter that was written by Meir Shapiro to the Chavetz Chaim, and Meir Shapiro wrote, "I know you're old, and it's hard for you to invest all the koiches in your avoda, but you're our Kohen Gadol, and you got to bring us home the bacon. You got to fight for us. So we're begging you to be misametz, so that you could be our Kohen Gadol to bring us whatever we need." Meir Shapiro would bring rise from here that every leader has to consider everything on behalf of his people. They told him Ishi Kohen Gadol. They made him promise that we're shluchah d'Rachmana, you're shluchah d'Rachmana, and you make sure to do this right. This seems to be inconsistent with Rabbi Shua. Rashi's what specific point is inconsistent? You are our shliach. You Kohen are our shliach. This would be not consistent with Rabbi Shua. They're the shluchim of the Rebbeinu Shalom. They're not our shluchim. So how could you say that you're our shluchim? So Rashi hani be'kravas karbonosa in their hakrav the karbonos are shluchim the rachmana are shluchim of the Rebbeinu Shalom. V'loy shluchenu are not our shliach. What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina to him mudur hanoah mimenu. Let's say I say that I'm not going to have hanoah from the kohen. Is the kohen allowed to do the avodah for me? Zok the Rabbi Shua. Mutar lo sheyakav alav karbonosa. It's not in the Dharma. It could be makar the karbonos. Why? Because the kohen's not working for you; he's working for the Rebbeinu Shalom. I believe that the Chedush Harim said, Shlucha de Rachmana, he touched it, Ken Militza. They're the Shluchim of Rachmanis. The Kohanim are the ones who are Mashpia Rachmanis on Klal Yisrael. The Yom Shlucha de Daninu, if you're going to argue that the Kohanim are Shluchim of the nation of Klal Yisrael, Zok the Gemara, Mi Ikamidi, the Anan Eloi Matzin Lamevat, Ushlucha de Dan Matzi Avdi, Rabbi Huna Bar Yeshua makes an argument. A shliach could only do what the Mishaleach tells him. If we ourselves can't do the avodah because we're not kohanim, how is it possible that they could do the avodah on our behalf? So I'll call upon them. So how could we call the kohanim our shluchim? How did the shliach bezin tell them that? How did this kenim tell them that you're our shluchim? Rabbi Huna Bar Yeshua says you're not shluchim. So tomorrow Hachik Amrlei Mashbin Anu Alecha Al Daitenu Val Das Bezin. It doesn't really mean that you're our shliach, but we're being mashpiyu al das harabim, which is a very severe shvua that you cannot just ignore. So, yes.
Who's responsible in a case of pigul? Does the Kohen have to replace it, or does the person bringing the korban have to replace it?
I think we learned that you could sue the Kohen.
You can sue the Kohen. So if the Kohen is the shliach of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, then once they accept the korban from you, wouldn't it be not on you anymore?
Because you
The
still
shliach
didn't
is
get your
makabel
kapara,
for the ball.
but you didn't get your kabbalah. You didn't get your kapara until the zrika was done with kashrus. So you don't get your kapara.
So the acceptance of the Kohen doesn't affect the acceptance until the zrika.
Correct.
So if you give something to a shliach, okay, fine. So the acceptance of it by the Kohen is the time of the zrika with the correct intent.
And it's interesting enough, the only way you could know if a Kohen made a pigel is if he tells you.
Right.
Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says. So let's see Rashi. That they told him you're a shliach, lav b'avodah karmelei. Like Rav Huna Bar Yeshua said, it's not that you're your shliach and doing the avodah. Elalayin kabbalah shvua. You're a shliach to be mekabel the shvua. Kloimer loy lefi machshava shebelibcha. Don't try to have in mind some loophole as to why you could swear without being over. In Bosel Laharim Bekabolos Shvua, if you want to try to think of some loophole as to what you really meant when you said these words, we're telling you, Anu Mashbino Isach Lefidai Teinu Vidas Best. Your shvua is not your machshava. You're accepting the shvua that we're being mashpia you from the bestin. That's what they meant to say. In other words, there's no way to weasel your way out of this shvua. Who and both people cry. Who they were chayshim for being a tzeduki. That's highly offensive. And what was he doing wrong as a tzeduki? To prepare the ketores for losses oisa al machtas ha'esh behechel. Before he enters the Kodesh Kodeshim, to put the ketores on the fire and make it smoke already. And then we know that the Kohen Gadol has to do this inside the Kodesh Kodeshim, not outside. Why do they think it needs to be done inside the Kodesh Kodeshim? Because the Tzedukim, we will soon see the reason for why they felt. It says kiba onon yerah lakataris, which means when yerah lakaparis, meaning when I come in already, there's already an onon, which means the onon has to be created, the smoke has to be created before we go in. That's how the Tzedukim learned the pasuk wrongly, but since we were worried that they would do that, we stopped it. So that's why he cried, because they were chayshim for being a Tzeduki. What do they cry? If you're chayshit somebody who's really a kosher, you end up getting physical makas. So when Moshe was chayshit Klal Yisrael for not believing, he ended up being punished on his hand. His body got punished. The kol kach lama. Why are we so concerned to make the kohen swear? Hashvua azos lama. So the Morishli is sakin me bechutz v'yachnis, so that the kohen should not wrongly put the ketores onto the coals outside of the kodesh kodeshim. Kedech shedukim oisim, like the tzedukim do. Shaloi sakin ketores Rashi maloi chafnaim ani tenis via bekavur malamachta kedechsivu maloi chafta maloi chafnov the nosan the ketores alaish. Bechutz behechal hayu nois tzedukim al ha'esh. The tzedukim would put it on the fire already in the hechal. The agagach machnisen, and only then would they come into the kodesh kodeshim. So you darshan al yavoy ki im be'anon ki be'anon eira. You're not allowed to come in unless you have an anon. You're not allowed to come. Mashma, they wrongfully think that it's mashma ki be'anon oshan hakatoris yavoy. The Ketores has to come in to the Kodesh HaKodeshim already in smoke form. And that's wrong. Now, the next Gemara I find very, very shver. I find very shver. Because sometimes when I have to squeeze into a tight spot, so my belly gets stuck in between the two areas in front of me and behind me. But my nose is free and clear. But from the Gemara, we see that your nose should protrude further out of your body than your belly. So I'm thinking maybe it's not a shver Gemara, maybe it's just a shver me. Maybe I need to conform to the Gemara sizing. So let's see what the Gemara says. Once a Tzeduki did his thing, he did the avodah wrong, but in his mind he thought he did it great. And he went in to the Kodesh HaKodeshim the wrong way. When he came out, he was so happy. He sang Mara Kohen, Simcha Gedola. Finally, I was able to do the mitzvah kel chasei. Pagaboy Aviv, he met his father. Amaloi, his father said, "What are you so happy about, pal?" He says, "Beni, sure, I knew what to do, and we're good, but keep it down. Don't smile. You're making too big of a deal. You're going to catch you." We would never actually do it because we're terrified of the Perushim. So just keep it quiet. Don't be so excited about what you did. Amr Loi. So his son told him back, "What are you talking about? Kol Yamai Hayisi Mitzdar al Mikra Zeh. I always was mitzvah that I couldn't be mekayim the pasuk properly. I'm sorry, I keep on saying kataris. Meaning we have to put the taris into the machna before, and no one ever did it, and it bothered me. We were never yotze the mitzvah. Amarti, I said, Masa Yavai Liyodi. When will I be kohen gadol? When will I be rich enough to buy myself the kuna gedola so that I'll be able to do it properly? Vakemenu, I'll be able to do it properly. Achshav, now that I finally got this opportunity, and I'm the kohen gadol. Should I not be mekayim it? Which is a terrible kilkel. Omer, they said, it didn't take very long, till this kohen died. He didn't even get a proper burial. His body was thrown into a dump. And there were worms coming out of his nose. Why his nose? That's the very first part of his body that will enter the house. Because it sticks out in front. Like we looked at Masechah Shavuos, if you walk into a Beis HaMenukah and you walk in backwards, even if his whole body is in this house, except for his nose, tar, he'll be tar. So you see from here, if you're walking in backwards, your nose goes in the last. So if you're walking forward, your nose goes in the first. And there are those who say, no, he didn't survive. As soon as he came out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, he dropped dead. There was some noise and commotion that the Kohanim heard in the Azara. A malach slapped him across the face, and they heard the noise. The Kohanim, his brothers, went in, and they found him dead. They found the footprint, a hoof print of a calf, imprinted into the back of this kohen between his shoulders. In other words, he got a good kick in the back that threw him out, and that killed him. How do you know that the footprint of malachim are a hoof of a kosher animal? The kaf ragleim kikaf regel egel. So that was a sign that, in fact, he got a good kick in the pants. He got a good kick in the pants from the malach. Zot Eile Gemara Bater. Omar Zechariah ben Kavutel. In our Mishnah, it says Zechariah ben Kavutel. Zot Gemara Masnele Rab Chanan bar Rava l'chia bar Rav. Rab Chanan bar Rava was, I guess, tutoring the L'chia bar Rav, kamei de Rav in front of Rav. Omar, he quoted our Mishnah saying Zechariah ben Kaputo with a pay. Umachmal Rav b'yadar, Rav said, In other words, he made a signal with his hands that it's Kaputo with a base. Fractic Gemara, why is he making sign language? He should have just told him it's with a base, not a pay. Why does he have to make sign language? So Gemara, Krishma Avakar. He was in the middle of lading Krishma, so he couldn't speak out, so he made with his hands Simon. Fractic Gemara, are you allowed to make Simon with your hands in the middle of Krishma? If someone's reading the Krishma, he shouldn't make Ramazan with his eyes. These are all ways of signaling without speaking. You're not allowed to do that. So how could Rav do that? All of the Kasavaimer, the pasuk says regarding him, you didn't call me Yaakov. You're too busy for me. You're not focused on me. So you see, you're not allowed to do that. But we're like Kasha. In the first parak of Krishma, you're not allowed to make any simonim at all. But in the second parak, you can make simonim. There's a shaila if the first parak is the pasuk of Shema, and then via hafta already, you can make simonim. But we hold that the first parak means the hafta as well, and only during v'hayim shemaya, if necessary, not for no reason at all, but if necessary, you're allowed to make a remez. We should speak in Torah. So we darshan bum. Tefillah, you're supposed to say quietly, but when you learn, you have to learn with a koil. You have to learn loud. You should speak in learning. Don't speak about other things. You should always focus in learning. Actually, the Shulchan Aruch Harav passes halacha l'maisa that you're not mekayim Talmud Torah unless you learn B'koil. You have to learn B'koil. Sometimes you have to think something through so you can be quiet, but you have to learn B'koil. And it actually is negei halacha l'maisa if you're mechuyev to make birchas Torah when you're thinking and learning. The Shulchan Aruch Harav holds you don't have to make birchas Torah when you're thinking and learning because it's not called Talmud Torah. You have to be verbalizing it. Rav Acha Omar, v'dibarta bom, asay oisen kva, make them kva, make Torah kva, v'al tasem ara, and don't make your learning ara. Omar Rava, hasach sich aschulin, over basay. One who speaks Dvarim B'Telem is over the mitzvah to say, shenemar v'dibarta bom, bom v'lo b'dvarim acherim. We should discuss Torah, not anything else. Rav Acha B'Yakov Omar, over b'lav, he's over b'lav, shenemar kol hadvarim, yigayim lo yuchal ish l'daper. All the things you speak are nonsense. A person's not allowed to speak them. In other words, a person shouldn't be speaking Dvarim B'Telem. It's already 6:50. I think we have like 2 minutes left because my watch is fast. I learned that yesterday. So let's quickly hop around the Mishnah. Because the Kohen was getting very drowsy. Yom Kippur night, he's falling asleep. So they snap. And they tell him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master Kohen Gadol, get up and do a trick for me on the floor. Put your feet on the floor, on the cold floor to wake you up. They're occupying until it's the time to shech the carbon top. My tzarada, what is tzarada? Sar sadada, the tzara of this finger. Mahi gadol. So there's those who Shalom learns it's the tzara of the thumb, meaning your pointer and your thumb, and you snap. I can't snap good with my pointer, but Tosha Shon brings another shot that it's the middle finger and the thumb, which is how we snap. Machibe Rab Huna, the Azul Kala B'Chule Beirav. Rab Huna showed how to snap, and there was such a loud snap, the whole household of Rav heard it. So that's what they did to keep the Kohen Gadol awake. They told him, teach us, show us a move, show us a cool dance move. Mahi, what was the cool dance move that they wanted him to show them? Teach us how to do kida. And kida was a unique type of bowing that you stood up and you only bent over at the waist and you were able to put your hands on the ground. So it was a very complicated way of doing kida. I believe Rav got injured doing it once. But that's what they asked him to do because that would wake him up. They didn't use any instruments with their mouth. What would they tell him? They said, if you're going to become tummy, you won't do the avodah, so then what's it all worth it? Stay awake so we can do the avodah right. Lo, you shouldn't call a Laila. The Choshev Eden of Yisraelim didn't even go to sleep the night of Yom Kippur. Why? I guess they made noise, so they wanted to make noise. There should be noise around so that the Kohen Gadol shouldn't fall asleep. So he shouldn't fall asleep. Tanya, we learned there was an Indian that even not in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, there was an Indian to stay up a whole night Yom Kippur, but they stopped doing it because it caused problems. They ended up doing Averis by staying up the whole night. Rashis Mesachkim Anoshim V'Noshim Yachad Uban Lavera. They would party around the whole night Yom Kippur, which led to bad things. Which city was the city where these not such good things were done? It was the city of Nardah. The Amarle Eliyahu Rabbi Yehuda. Eliyahu told Rabbi Yehuda, Achua the Rav Salach Hasida, Amrisu Amayla Yos Mashiach. You want to know why Mashiach doesn't come? I'll tell you why Mashiach doesn't come. Because V'ha'idna Yom Kippur Haba. Today is Yom Kippur, and the Ibul Kama Besolta B'Nardah. And Lo Yaleinu, there's terrible things going on. Amalei Kadosh Baruch Hu, my Amar. What does Kadosh Baruch Hu say? Amalei LePesach Chatas Roivitz. That's what Hashem says. That if you're not careful, the Aver is ready to come. The Satan, my Amar. What does the Satan say? Amalei Satan b'Yom Kippur Leslie Rishus Elastune. This is a very monumental Gemara. The Satan has no Rishus to be mekatrig on Yom Kippur. Mimai Amar Rami Bachama Hasatan v'Gematria plus Meya v'Shishan v'Arba. The word Satan, the word Hasatan is Gematria 364. And the year plus Meya Vishitan Varba Yomi is the Rishus Lastune. He has Rishus to cause trouble 364 days of the year, not 365 days of the year, because B'Yomi Tekipura less Rishus Lastune. The Satan doesn't have a right to be a Satan. He loses his position. He has a vacation day on Yom Kippur. I guess we could stop here and have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shkar.
Shabbos.
Yosy, what